I'm Brent Barnett on Brownfield Ag News, and this is Unlocking Potential, a content partnership with Advanced Agrilytics. Thanks for joining us. Here with us on the program is Jeremy Hogan from Advanced Agrilytics. Jeremy, how are you doing here today?
I'm doing great, Brent. How you doing?
We're doing really good. Thanks for being here. And Jeremy, you might tell the listeners a little bit about your background with the company and some of the work that you do.
Yeah, you bet. I'm one of the lead agronomists at Advanced Agrilytics, and I grew up on a farm in central Illinois, attended the University of Illinois, and have worked in really various agronomic roles for about the last 30 years. And I've been with Advanced Agrilytics for 5 years, and it's been a great journey. And look forward to visiting with you and sharing with you more about it.
Well, we're closing out another crop year, and we want to start by talking about some of the key things that growers experienced and learned from during the past year.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's always a good time to look back and kind of reevaluate what took place in the last growing season. And of course, the geography that Advanced Agrilytics covers is about a nine-state geography. And I reside in East Central Illinois, West Central Indiana is really kind of the trade area that I spend most of my time in. So I can really share with you some of the things that we learned here locally, but obviously in different geographies in Iowa, where you're at, Missouri, and then in the Eastern Corn Belt, there's probably some different challenges. But right here in central Illinois, some of the challenges we had last year, if you think back, we had above average temperatures in February and March, probably some of the warmest temperatures we've ever had in the month of February and March. And that resulted in really some challenges from a nitrogen standpoint where guys put fall nitrogen on and we had rapid conversion from ammonium to nitrate. So really what it did is it put some of that nitrogen at risk if we had subsequent rainfall. We did finally get in and plant, but it was not after we did finally get some rain, and it delayed planting really into early May. And that created some challenges for guys, but we finally got the crop in and went through a dry spell of about 60 days or maybe even longer, and finally got some rain there in, I'd say, early July that really helped save the crop, and it helped really get us to the point where we were very pleased with the yields overall. But I'd say the conditions that we had throughout most of the grain fill period across most of the Corn Belt were really fairly mild, although we did go through a warm stretch in late August that I think kind of shortened up the crop and didn't allow us to take advantage of grain fill maybe as long as we could have. But for the most part, talking to growers and to my counterparts across, the central Corn Belt, I think everybody's really pretty pleased at the outcome.
How does Advanced Agrilytics, your team there, help growers overcome some of these obstacles? You mentioned some of the delayed planting issues and kind of those impacts of some agronomic issues from that. How do you guys help?
Yeah, it's a great question. And anytime we get in a situation where planting is delayed, it really changes the dynamics of the whole growing season from a logistics standpoint. Agronomically, it can change things. But when you think about, let's just take corn, for example, and let's say we're delayed from April 15th to May 15th, we know we can still raise good crops into mid and late May from a corn perspective. But there are some things that we think about in terms of the condensed growing season. And that corn plant has the really an innate ability to adjust to a shorter growing season by 30 days or even longer. But when we do have a shorter growing season, we've got to think about trying to find ways to maximize vegetative growth, maximize the factory, and build as big of a factory as we can prior to that grain fill period. And so it does cause some challenges, but if we think through those and put ourselves in a position to overcome them, when we get in the moment or prior to, then we can overcome those. And on soybeans, obviously soybeans are a photoperiod plant. And as we start to lose days, it becomes more difficult to maximize node and pod number, particularly when we get into late May and on into June. And so again, those are some things we think about, and we put strategies together to help growers overcome some of those challenges.
Can we also talk about some of the additional in-season strategies that the company takes to help ensure growers have success?
Yeah, you bet. And we not only take in-season strategies, but we do a lot of pre-planning and put those strategies in place prior to the growing season as well as in season. And so when you think about, let's just use nitrogen, for example, and we know certain environments in the field are at greater risk of nitrogen loss through denitrification if we have heavy rains. So putting a strategy together to make sure that we understand where those environments are, what the risks are, and strategies that we can implement to mitigate risk if we do have periods of high saturation. And if we can do that, then that helps us get to the finish line because we know nitrogen uptake's a season-long strategy. When you think about, for example, P and K, phosphorus and potassium uptake, we know certain environments have a harder time moving P and K into the plant through diffusion because there's less water in certain environments in the field than others. And so putting a strategy together to really help growers understand which environments we need to pay more attention to from a concentration of P and K versus other environments where we just have higher uptake rates and maybe we just don't need as high of a concentration in those environments.
As we look ahead to 2025, obviously a lot of talk right now about the upcoming growing season in the spring. How's Advanced Agrilytics working with growers at this time as they kind of make those plans and make decisions?
Yeah, you bet. We spend a lot of time planning, and obviously the growing season's 4 months long. We get the rest of the year to plan and put a game plan together. But when you think about it, Brent, it's really no secret that today's farm economy it really presents us with some challenges that are going to require farmers and all of us to roll up our sleeves and get more efficient with the input investments that we're spending money on. And we've got to maximize productivity at the same time. And farmers continually tell us that with rising input costs, lower commodity prices, higher interest rates, higher equipment costs, that these are things that are going to cause to force us to really there's zero margin for error. Okay, I mean essentially there's zero margin for error for farmers today, and we understand that. And so given these challenges, these economic challenges that we're in, I think it's really fair to ask in our business, has precision ag really done what it's been promised to do over the last 10, 20, and 30 years? Or could we find different ways to maximize efficiency by looking through a different lens and looking at precision ag differently? And that's what we try to do at Advanced Agrilytics is really try to say and challenge the status quo. And is precision ag really has it delivered, on the promises that we've been promised for 10, 20, and 30 years? And in some cases, I think there's opportunity to always get better.
Can you expand further there, Jeremy, on challenging the status quo of precision ag strategies? Because precision agriculture continues to be talked about in the industry, getting a lot more and more discussion there. Can you kind of expand further on that for the growers?
Yeah, you bet. I think back over my 30-year career, and I think there's been a lot of advancements in the equipment side with companies like Deere, Precision Planting, Raven, et cetera. But from a precision agronomy standpoint, I often think back, man, what have we been doing differently today than we were doing, 10, 20, 30 years ago? And there's been a lot of improvements in genetics and traits and stuff like that. But from an agronomy standpoint, we really pride ourselves in looking again through a different lens. So I'll give you an example, Brent. When we think about, and I mentioned earlier, areas of the field that are at greater risk of nitrogen loss. Okay, most farmers know where those areas are, but are we doing anything about that? And so what we try to do is really map out that environmental variability and then come up with a prediction layer of where that nitrogen loss risk is the highest. And if we know certain areas of the field are at higher risk of nitrogen loss, then why as an industry do we continue to put the same rate of nitrogen protectant or of nitrogen on every environment in the field? And the technology today exists for us to run various rates of protectant out there. But again, in many cases, we just run a static rate or we don't run one at all. And if we're running a static rate, and let's say we're applying or over applying by 16 ounces of a product on a particular environment where we don't see nitrogen loss from year to year, and then in other environments where we almost always see nitrogen loss, and those environments maybe 3, 4, 5 times their greater risk of nitrogen loss. Heck, we could be losing 20 bushel on those environments, and at $44 corn, that's $80 an acre times 1,000 acres, that's $80,000. And where we've over applied, let's just say that's costing us $8 an acre, across 1,000 acres, that's $8,000. And so, can we afford to overspend on strategies that aren't making us more money and under apply on environments that are pulling yield away? And those are types of things that we challenge growers to think about. And can we do better? Can we be more efficient and maximize productivity at the same time?
We also want to ask about the enterprise report that's utilized by Advanced Agrilytics. Jeremy, can you talk about what this report is and maybe provide some examples?
Yeah, great question. We pride ourselves in our enterprise report. And really what it is it's a decision support tool, a query tool that we put all of the information in from the customers we work with, and we can query across the larger geography or really drill down to that enterprise or a specific field or an environment within the field. And so when we think about, and I'll give you an example, a counterpart of mine that was presenting at a grower meeting this week rather, showed an example from the enterprise report where they looked at a grower's hybrid selection across the entire operation. And then we looked at the different environments in the field. You've got your water limited, your stable, and your saturated acre, high ground, stable, and low ground. And certain hybrids really stood out in the low ground where we had higher nitrogen, potential nitrogen loss risk, more saturation. Other hybrids, when they got in those environments, they really struggled. And the data really pulled out which hybrids next year, if we have a field that's more poorly drained, we want to position that hybrid in that field and maybe a hybrid that handles the high ground or the water limited acres better. Another example I'll give you, Brent, is when we think about spatial agriculture, as an industry, and I'm going back to some of the challenges that I think we've had as an industry with precision ag, we've tended to assign a static critical level of P and K fertilizer across the entire field. And in some cases, it's across the entire county, and in some cases, it's a third of the state, and in some universities, it's in the entire state. We have one critical level across the entire state. But when we think about P and K and how it's taken up, we know P and K are taken up primarily through diffusion, and diffusion requires water. And so if we don't have water, we don't have diffusion, therefore we don't have P and K being taken up. And so when we think about environmental variability across the field, we've got acres that are higher in elevation that water runs away from, 2 acres lower in elevation where water runs to. These acres typically have a lot more moisture than the high ground, and the high ground dries out quicker. And so do we really need to be putting the same concentration of fertilizer in this environment where we have higher rates of diffusion versus the high ground where we have a reduced diffusion? And so our strategy really focuses on concentration, particularly on environments where we absolutely have a reduced opportunity to move nutrients into the plant. We've got to get more nutrients there. So when we do have moisture, man, we can move a lot of nutrients in a hurry.
As we wind down this month, what advice would you give the growers listening to this as they make those preparations for the next growing season?
Yeah, it's a great question. I could go on and on, Brent, on things that we need to do to prepare. But the one thing that, I challenge growers to think about is, after you get through a crop year, what did we learn? What went well? What can we improve on? And how do we make changes for next year? But I also like to ask growers, when you think about your operation and where you were at 5 years ago, and the advancements that you've made agronomically to where you're at today, and you think ahead the next 5 years and the challenges that we're likely going to have moving forward, is the current strategy that you're on going to get you to where you want to go? And I think it's a fair question. And there's opportunities again, I think through some of the strategies that we're implementing on our customers to really maximize yield, reduce risk, and really take that and change the outcome. Because when we think about yield, really yield is just an outcome, but it doesn't define the true potential of an acre. And so if we can find ways to define the true potential, manipulate the environments that are pulling yield away and change the outcome, man, the opportunity is really endless. And that's what we found with some of the strategies we're implementing. And it's really been exciting.
Jeremy, always great to catch up with you. Great insights here as always. Hope you have a good week and thanks for joining us again.
You bet, Brent. Thank you so much and have a good Thanksgiving.
For more information about Advanced Agrilytics and how they can help you transform your farming operation, contact your local Advanced Agrilytics precision agronomist, or you can visit their website at advancedagrilytics.com. This has been Unlocking Potential here on Brownfield, a content partnership with Advanced Agrilytics. I'm Brent Barnett with Brownfield Ag News.